Welcome to Philosophy of Value Workshops number 27 of Series 7. And the question for today is, can value theory ethics supersede all others as well as express human values? Reading for today from one of my works, The Pursuit of Value, Chapter 2, Section 8. In recent workshops, we have been discussing the main theories of ethics and how they are flawed in some way. So today I want to present an alternative theory of ethics that is also compatible with wider issues of life. I call this a value theory ethics based on the principle of an affirmation of value or the will to value. Robert Nozick and others have spoken about the value of values. I'm talking about the value of value. Values are, of course, particular values, and value describes all values in general as my variegated objective. And value can be posed as an objective like other collectives such as consciousness and even happiness. I've given arguments for the viability of value itself as an objective in other workshops. Yet before presenting value theory ethics as an alternative, I need to review critiques of the standard theories. We found that Kantian ethics had a restricted conception of rationality and universality. This limited both its humanity and versatility by attempting to determine action in every situation. Utilitarianism is also subject to standard criticisms. These were the calculation, quantification and justification of the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. There's also the problem of explaining why an individual would be motivated to pursue this ideal. And we also have the problem of the inadequacy of happiness as an ethical objective. Aristotle's virtue theory prizes excellence of character and disposition expressed in the virtues. The virtues are dispositions or states like courage, loyalty, honesty, generosity and magnanimity. There are a number of reasons why virtue theory is favoured in modern thought. These include its emphasis on character and its aversion to rules that focus on ethical acts, as well as its objective of happiness or eudaimonia as a flourishing or good life. But virtue theory also has numerous problems that I propose to resolve by its reconfiguration as a value theory. In my view, these problems arise due to the various ways because virtue theory neglects the concept of value, such as the intrinsic value of people, goodwill, rights and duties, and the fact value and the is-ought distinctions. Motivation by the opaque dispositions of virtue theory also result in an unclear or lack of principles of action. I spelt out these problems in last week's account of virtue theory, and I noted how value theory ethics can resolve these and other problems. This is because on value theory ethics, the agent's assessment of good or bad action is reflected back onto himself. And this explains both the mandatory and the distinctively elevating character of ethical experience. A principle of value also explains both normativity as well as the relativity of its material expression. That is, material expression and practical action is derived from the pursuit or maintenance of value. For instance, I explain that values give greater focus to reasons for actions than inherently opaque dispositions, and that a value theory ethics also resolves problems of justification, determination of action and purpose. But to reach those conclusions, further comparisons between virtue and value theory are needed. To begin with, the virtues and dispositions of virtue theory can be replaced by the value states of value theory ethics. The virtues are dispositions like magnanimity, courage, loyalty, honesty and generosity. The virtues are then typically value states, enabling a reinterpretation of virtues as values. This also then enables a subsequent reinterpretation of virtue theory as value theory, that is given several other features that we have yet to describe. The notion of value states is my own term for mental states that necessarily contain values. Value states are, for example, love, hate, dignity, self-esteem, honour, duty, resentment, fear and desire. Notice that value states are both positive and negative values that need to be differentiated. Cognitive states like thought, perception, reason, belief and memory aren't value states. What we are talking about here are the goals, objectives and outcomes of different theories of ethics. For utilitarianism, these are affect states like happiness for the greatest number of people. For virtue theory, they are virtues like worthy dispositions, excellence of character and eudaimonia. For value theory, they are understood in terms of value and values like self-esteem and moral fortitude. But apart from this presentation, there is no value theory ethics currently available in the literature. This absence underlines my arguments made elsewhere about the neglect of value. This neglect is faintly echoed in the early 19th century by Charles G. Shaw when he states that value as a principle of ethics has been overlooked by both ancient and modern philosophy, and this neglect constitutes another argument for value theory ethics. Yet I would quickly like to make a couple of other comparisons in order to characterize value theory ethics. Speaking of eudaimonia, Aristotle wrote, "Will not knowledge of the good have a great influence on life?" But in response to this passage, and representing many modern thinkers, David Wiggins wrote that, "But in reality there is no such thing as the good, no such thing as knowledge of it, and nothing fixed independently of ourselves to aim at." I agree with Wiggins, but characterize that trajectory in terms of value that we produce from within ourselves. In this sense, the principle of value theory is an affirmation or will to value leading to a sufficiency of value. And this principle must be qualified not as a maximization or quantification, but a quality of value. Another key comparison is the retaining of the celebrated conceptual framework of virtue theory for value theory. This is expressed in the versatility of virtue theory reasons for actions over the rigidity of the Kantian model. That is, a preference in my value theory view and the virtue theory view for making judgments to achieve ends. That is, instead of the Kantian model of devising maxims for every occasion. And still outlining the basics, every theory of ethics is required to demonstrate at least three things. These are 1, a foundation, 2, a formal principle, and 3, its material outcomes. The foundation of a value theory ethics is found in the structures and consciousness of value. The formal principle of value theory ethics is the will to value or the affirmation of value. Material content or outcome is provided by the judgment of actions as good or bad. I call these foundations normative rather than universal because they don't exist everywhere and for all conscious beings. As I will eventually explain, they are brought into existence by the development of self-consciousness. As such, they are inescapable, but not enjoyed by chimpanzees, infants, or even some adults. I will attend to these requirements in due course. Yet there is also the more general and thought unanswered question of what is ethics or morals? G.E. Moore held that the nature of the moral good cannot be defined, but I hope to define both ethics and the moral good in terms of value. And part of that question is, how can we explain the experience of moral obligation that we feel compelled to act? This isn't the same issue as explaining why are we motivated to act in particular theories of ethics. I'm talking about the feeling that morally we must act, whatever theory we believe in. Our first clue is that all the principles of theories of ethics are values that guide moral action. And we can extend the significance of value into other human activities. In religion, for example, God is the believer's highest conceivable value. Politics has been described by David Easton as the authoritative allocation of values. And a meaningful life is also a valuable, worthwhile life and is lit up by value. But given the limitations of the main theories of ethics, we can't use these directly to answer the question, what is ethics? And ethics is also sometimes inadequately defined as having to have relations with other people. Yet value itself now presents itself as a candidate for explaining both ethics and the moral good. One formulation of morality that implies the concept of value is as follows. Morality can be defined as the process of reflecting moral valuations back onto the agent. And that reflection of value back onto the agent accounts for the elevating experience of morality. Actions deemed to be moral reflect positive judgments and values back onto the agent. And conversely, actions deemed to be immoral reflect negative judgments. The morality of those actions is deliberately unspecific. This is because what is deemed to be moral isn't fixed or definitive. That final statement presupposes the widely contested and accepted relativity of the material content of moral action. Yet the preceding definition allows for the normativity of the formal content of the principle of value ethics at hand. A distinction here is between the material content of moral action and the formal content of a principle. We must return to this later with explanations of both these material and formal contents. The point here, however, is the definition of morality in terms of the agent's reflected value back onto himself. And this explains the elevating experience of morality as well as its seeming inescapability and compulsion. This explanation can be extended by comparison to the experience of free will. That is, a limited imagination in perceiving alternative courses of action compel one course of action, and an identification with their own thoughts can amplify this feeling of having only one course of action. Yet there is also a more powerful motivation, at work here. It is the above idea that moral action enhances our self-value that is arguably a primary driving force. And the driving force of our need for value presents itself as mandatory and inescapable. More specifically, this explanation is also an endorsement of value theory ethics. The principle of value, or the will to value, as a primary driving force can only be briefly outlined later, and it is used here as an explanation of satisfaction, not of morality, which is ultimately subject to choice. Yet given for the moment the principle of the will to value, a value theory ethics can then be constructed. That is, as an acting agent, I value myself and seek to maintain and further my value. Therefore, I must ask, what must I choose to do in order to maintain and further my value? As implied earlier, actions judged as virtuous will accrue value. Actions judged as bad will negate value. For example, taking things that don't belong to you and that you don't need is greed, which reflects negative value. And harming others without cause is pathological, which also reflects negative value on yourself. And of course, such a thought process presupposes an awareness of these things, which is why value theory ethics is unlike Kantian ethics. That is, value theory is a fallibilist theory in its material content of its actions. Kant's ethics employs a categorical imperative that calls for necessary relations between thought and action, but it is highly contentious that such necessary relations exist outside logic and mathematics. Kant does, however, employ volition in the form of good intention and as the goodwill and duty. Yet Kant argues that even goodwill and duty must be justified by reason. Traditional as well as Kantian moral values have been thought to be justified by objectivity and reason. But there are at least three further problems with this approach. 1. There are no objective values in the fabric of the world, argued by Mackey, others and myself. 2. Hume's repudiation of mandating the acceptance of objective values through reason. 3. There is a misplaced wish to universalize right or wrong moral action. For example, this is seen in Kant's extreme position that we must never lie under any circumstances. Moreover, the primacy traditionally given to objectivity is in fact a contingent choice. We can similarly attribute primacy of value to pragmatic reasons for making a choice, and value theory calls for our best judgments based on fact and reason, not necessary relations. Of course, such judgments will be contingent and fallible because they depend on the agent's limited knowledge. Yet this compares favourably to Popper's fallibilistic view of knowledge that it can be mistaken. On a value theory ethic, we must work out what is the best thing to do in a pragmatic way. And fallibilism in science or ethics isn't a weakness but a strength. We noted earlier that theories of ethics are required to demonstrate at least three things. 1. A foundational basis. 2. A formal principle. And 3. Material outcomes of action in practice. Yet there is a fourth further requirement, also voiced by Bernard Williams, that an ethics must also account for error and weakness beyond Kant's apodictic certainty. And value theory ethics is fallibilist in its material content, as well as inescapable for two reasons. It's inescapable because the satisfaction of human motivation must inevitably be directed towards value. Two, it's fallibilist in the manner of Popper's fallibilist theory of knowledge and falsification theory of science. That is, the material content of action is only directed by our best assessments of knowledge and reason. This approach replaces untenable ethical necessity with a more arguable inescapability. As A.J. Ayer explained, strict necessity can only apply to logic, not physics or ethics. There can be no definitive criteria for determining the material content of right action in a complex and diverse world. Actions will differ under different circumstances by different people as expressions of the will to value. But it might be argued that action determined by the best thing to do is no better than social convention. Yet on a value theory ethic, motivation to do the best thing is guided by an appreciation of value. And as shown, value reasons for action are both deep-reaching and have strong reflective effects on the agent. Yet there are other problems of seeking to maintain and further one's value through pragmatic and rational action. One problem is that maximizing one's own value doesn't seem to be an adequately moral motivation. Put bluntly, it just seems to be selfish and not enlightened self-interest as might be claimed. And it raises the difficult question of other people for a subjectivist value theory ethic. With respect to this question of enlightened self-interest as a moral motivation for valuing other people, Bernard Williams presents the possibility of self-indulgence for such theories of ethics. He writes, what the agent cares about is not so much other people as himself caring about other people. But in a similar way, virtue theorists criticize Kantians as just attempting to do good, like a do-gooder. This is because virtue theorists regard real moral good as internalized into character and disposition. I want to respond to this issue in three ways. These are by qualifying value theory objectives by an appreciation of the intrinsic value of other people, and by distinguishing reflexive from non-reflexive forms of value theory ethics. To begin with, value theory was said to involve an affirmation or will to value leading to a sufficiency of value. But that sufficiency isn't a maximization or quantification, but a quality of value. And that quality must encompass features like ambivalence, absence, alterity, vulnerability and need. And in answer to the question, why must it encompass such features? The answer is because we have chosen them as the best we can find. In the case of other people, Kant tells us that we must treat humanity as an end and never merely as a means. Yet for Kant, the value of others is derived from the rationality and the universalization of our own dignity and value. But it's doubtful whether universalization affords an adequate appreciation of intrinsic value. Robert Nozick advises that we should appreciate another as a value-seeking I. Yet this is little advance over Kant's respect for rational beings as ends. But value theory recognizes other people as conscious beings who are the highest form of intrinsic value, and that our own value is dependent upon the recognition of that value in giving it due consideration. that is, ethical relations with others, requires a theory of relations, not just a recognition of their value. Part of that theory is found by distinguishing reflexive from non-reflexive forms of value theory ethics. Value theory ethics is presented above as both a rational and reflexive process of choosing value. Yet non-reflexive forms of value theory ethics are also available. Virtue and existentialist ethics are typically not non-reflexive, that is, they express dispositions or authenticity. Yet virtue and existentialist ethics can also accommodate a determination of right action through reason. That is, value ethics can similarly produce action simply as a rational expression of the agent's values. For example, the agent can act on reflection according to how his actions reflect well or badly on himself. But like virtue theory, on value ethics, an agent can legitimately hold internalized values that he seeks to express. On this view, he doesn't ask, how can I maximize my value, but how can I best express my values? These values could be better or worse, and they are expressed in action and in relation to other people. Yet these values can be informed for the better by the principles of value suggested. Moreover, the agent's values can be internalized as aspects of his character and dispositions, as in virtue theory. The agent can thereby act pre-reflectively, as on virtue theory, avoiding recriminations of self-interest. Value theory ethics can thereby express its values in three ways. One, as a rational choice to maximize or develop one's value, which may entail respect for others. Two, as an expression of the values I hold without an overt pursuit of self-interest or self-value. And three, as a pre-reflective expression of internalized values from within my character and dispositions. In this case, the good person doesn't will good or try to be good. He is good, as in virtue theory, or as Yoda of Star Wars says, do not try, do. I want to say something more in support of these expressions of value and the principle of the will to value. The question is often posed of, what does the will to value lead to? Firstly, it need not lead to anything. It could be its own reward as a value or as a tenable theory. But I hold that the will to value, or the value of value, results in a certain sufficiency of value. Sufficiencies of value are expressed as value states like self-esteem, dignity, courage, patience and magnanimity. Yet of course human finitude means that sufficiencies are always insufficient and are works in progress. And this insufficiency as well as sufficiency is also driving value forward to a further will to value. I have explained this sufficiency of value in detail elsewhere, but I can make a couple of comparisons here. Firstly, value sufficiency has a certain independence of experience comparable to happiness and pleasure. And Aristotle's eudaimonia is the supreme good, which he qualifies as self-sufficient. And as the supreme good is a moral concept, it can be inferred to be a sufficiency of value. I am making 2 points here. One is that value sufficiency is both an actual and a hypothetically ideal objective in a theory of value. Another is about the internal insufficiency of value that can be expressed as a disposition to act. Yet all theories of ethics must also deal with the noted problem of value formulated by Hume and More. Hume's law forbids deriving a moral ought from a factual is, endorsed by More's naturalistic fallacy. These principles are part of the problem of justification that all theories of ethics must overcome. Aristotle seemed to ignore the problem with an acceptance of virtue as excellence of character. Kant takes it that we are obliged to act on the dictates of reason that reveals our duty and the moral law. Mill holds it that psychologically and metaphysically impossible not to desire the pleasant. But as I have argued elsewhere, we can choose otherwise and walk away from these injunctions. As already implied, it's my view that a value theory ethics can resolve the problem of justification in three ways. 1. By taking value as a precondition of an ethical process rather than having to infer value. 2. By being able to produce a self-validating principle of value. 3. By making a choice for a principle that are both derived from values rather than facts. Ethicists like William Frank Kenner and Kurt Baer adopt a moral point of view to avoid Hume's and More's constraints. But this strategy faces the difficult problem of justifying why that moral point of view should be adopted. This illustrates the difficulty that ethical principles aren't justified by their coherence or even their basis in value. This is because unanticipated impediments to justification can arise even if values can be established. Therefore, final justification can only be made by choice based on our best judgments. These are arguments for choosing value theory as an approach which can provide a solution. We can offer more extensive arguments involving self-validation and structures of value and consciousness. The idea of the will to value as a self-validating principle was argued in an earlier series. Self-validating principles are found in logic and mathematics, but not thought possible in physics or ethics. Self-validation can be established in logic and mathematics by non-contradiction. For example, logic is determined by the self-evident and self-validating truths of Aristotle's 4 basic principles of logic. David Hilbert described mathematics as avoidance of contradiction and is therefore a self-validating a priori. And self-validating systems within the human sphere is Descartes' I think, therefore I am. Physics isn't self-validating because it's an a posteriori system of contingent observations. Importantly, mathematics and logic are self-validating but can't establish principles for systems of physics or ethics. But I propose that the will to value is self-validating because the alternative is contradictory and self-negating. The will to value can also be described as the will as the value of value, the affirmation of value, or the pursuit of value. Firstly, the will to value as the value of value isn't a tautology. It isn't a tautology because value can affirm value or not as the system of value of which it is a part, but it must affirm or value the system of value of which it is a part in order to value anything. And in a way comparable to the I think, therefore I am, value itself presupposes the will to value. And therefore not to value value is contradictory and self-negating. Yet not valuing value, which you may have chosen as the best option, can be self-contradictory in different ways. As above, not valuing value is a denial of the principle by which you are denying value. Not valuing value can also be a denial of an aspect of consciousness that we can't escape. And not valuing value can be a denial of a positive principle which is regressive. We are unexpectedly talking about constraints of choice derived from subjectivity. Hegel also paradoxically finds constraints arising from the exercise of freedom in his philosophy of right. Sartre follows Hegel, but because consciousness, choice, value and freedom are mutually implicative. Sartre is then able to go on to insist that we are condemned to choose and are condemned to be free. The point for us is that denial of choice can thereby be interpreted as a negation of value, and the avoidance of choice and freedom as bad faith can be viewed as regressive or contradictory. Sartre's notion of the spirit of seriousness illustrates the contradiction of not valuing the subjectivity of value. The spirit of seriousness is to take subjective values as objective to avoid freedom and responsibility. Either principles or objects can be thought to have objective rather than subjective value. The seriousness is to say that certain values are objective and therefore I have no choice. But if those values are subjective, that will be a contradictory position. So there are at least three arguments here in favour of the will to value as a principle of ethics and of life. 1. Justification, self-validation and internal coherence of value as a system calls for a will to value. 2. To value physical or cognitive objects instead of value itself is ultimately regressive. 3. To not value or affirm value itself is contradictory, self-negating and self-defeating. Therefore, the will to value, value is both valid and a self-validating principle. My position is that not valuing value as the will to value is contradictory, self-negating and self-defeating. Therefore, the will to value value is a self-validating system. But that does not make it an adequate principle of ethics, which has to fulfill many other functions. These are functions like truth, human practicality, and providing material content of action. One of these requirements is a resolution of the noted problems of value posed by Hume, More and others. Value theory of ethics mitigates this problem by starting with the presence of value, not with facts or reason. This can be achieved with a structural or phenomenological account of the origins of value. And such an account of the origins of value also provides at least 2 or 3 requirements of value theory ethics. 1. It explains the basis on which the will to value can be established. 2. It makes the important point of establishing a foundation for value theory ethics. And 3. Such an account explains the significance of value as an aspect of consciousness and human life. In my view, a credible analysis and explanation of value is found in the phenomenology of consciousness. This is because phenomenology generally makes a close identification between consciousness and value. For example, Heidegger cites care as the being of Dasein, and Sartre writes that the being of the self is value. And he continues that reflective consciousness cannot arise without at the same time disclosing values. What we are saying here is that value and consciousness are coexistent. This is explained with Sartre's close identification between consciousness, value and choice as selection. He writes that choice and consciousness are one and the same thing, and that every choice supposes elimination and selection, thereby producing value. And Sartre writes that choice isn't just a preference, but a selection traced back to its ontological foundation. But Sartre doesn't actually provide an analysis tracing choice back to its ontological foundation. But we can fill in by saying that contrast is a form of selection essential to cognition and thereby essential to consciousness. Or we can continue that contrast and selection are expressions of choice that produce value. For example, when I look left or right, I affirm what is on my right and negate what is on my left. These are the kind of selections that are essential to epistemic contrasts and perceptions. For example, a white spot on a white board can't be seen. It needs a contrast. But at least two objections can be made to this kind of explanation of incipient values. One, values also emerge from social and biological sources without such selection or choice. Two, the incipient values are not the values we need for motivation, morals, meaning or purpose. In response to social or biological values such must be experienced in consciousness in order to be values. That is, an automatic propensity to action is not a value. Such are only latent or potential values, if we can call them values at all. They only become values as mental states and moral values on selection when chosen as preferences. On this view, animals are conscious creatures who can have values but not moral values. Also, incipient values inherent to consciousness do not provide us with prescriptive moral values. But unlike social or naturalistic accounts, the above account is able to develop one with the faculty of choice. Also, in response to the criticism of explaining only trivial values, we can take the phenomenological analysis further. Martin Heidegger emphasized temporality and time as the horizon of being. Edmund Husserl spoke of the flow of consciousness and the flow of becoming, in which every experience has necessarily been preceded in time by experiences. That is, we find ourselves in a world of time or temporality, as well as diversity, divisibility, selection and choice. The diversity of the world demands selections and choices that produce value. Yet consciousness is also moving through time as well as through diversity in space. Judgments and values must be continually produced to cope with the flow of existence. This is both an underlying presence and confrontation of value and values that can be either ignored or acted on. Value and values constitute the very material with which we choose and make our choices about. I look to my left and see a window. I look to my right and see a door. I choose to walk through that door. Outside, I find someone lying on the floor. What do? Help, walk past, or ignore the person? Now we need recourse to the value theory of ethics and affirmation of value that I have outlined above. In conclusion, I will sum up my arguments about value theory ethics that take both positive and negative forms. Negative arguments include the failure of the standard ethical theories made elsewhere. These and the inadequacies of cognitive, affective and volitional states direct us towards values and value states. That is, a value theory ethics is constructed on the will to value, value and the pursuit of value. And the will to value produces a certain sufficiency of value in value states like self-esteem and magnanimity. Yet this will to value isn't simply self-value or a maximization of value, but is a quality of value. And that sufficiency and quality of value provides an ethic in the form of a value theory ethics. Such a historical development of morality and ethical theory is entirely expected, yet such a historical development of morality and ethical theory is entirely expected, yet it has always been resisted. Development is evident from Judaic ethics of law to Christian and Kantian ethics of intention. Development continues to modern and postmodern views of circumstances and individuality. And I see value theory ethics as part of this development. But I have grave doubts about whether ethics and morals is an adequate means of describing human experience. That is, not just as the limitation of not being able to describe the whole of human experience, but not being able to describe that area of value experience usually assigned to ethics. I've discussed this issue elsewhere, but don't have time to discuss it in depth today. For these reasons, I submit the will to value and sufficiency of value not as principles for alternative ethics, but as points of departure for another way of understanding human existence as consciousness. So let me have your comments and criticisms at the meeting or on websites like Zoom and meetup.com.